Hey everybody, my name is Malik Foster, co-host for the Counterpoise podcast. I would like to welcome y'all to our show today. I'm joined by my fellow co-hosts. Would y'all like to introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I am one of your other co-hosts. My name is Samantha Adams.
And I am Everett Stevenson, your third co-host of the Counterpoise podcast. Today we have a very interesting subject, as per usual, in which we are looking to discuss the rising statistics in homeschoolings, in particular within Black households. One of the things that we noticed was since 2020 and the pandemic, we know a lot of students weren't able to return to school, and a lot of schools, even public schools, were doing a version of still schooling, but it was schooling done in the homes. So there was a lot of activities and lessons that were done via computer, Zooms, things of that nature. And what we noticed too, as well, was a lot of parents were having to be a lot more active in the education of their students. And one of the things that came about with that is when they were going through the day to day, they're looking at the curriculum and things and realized that they felt as though there were things that may have been missing or things that they felt as though they would like to have added to the curriculum of their students. And so we've seen parents take on a more increased role in doing homeschooling for the students, for their children. In which case they are then able to assist and add other things into the curriculum that they feel may be important and that the public schools just may not be providing. We've seen recently the rise in some schools in the way that they are taking away certain things and certain materials from being taught, whether it was from sexual education to our country's history and the background in which it played with the slavery and things of that nature, to gender bases, on and so forth. In a lot of places, such as critical race theories and other teachings that may have been taken forth. We got the don't say gay laws, things of that nature. One of the big arguments that we've seen in the past as well has been schools arguing over books that they may be able to have in libraries that students will have access to, and those have been concerns that a lot of parents have raised in different platforms, whether it would be school board meetings, internet, uh, within newscasts and things of that nature. So we're here to discuss the rise in homeschooling since the 2020 pandemic. And so we have some statistics and things in the articles that we're going to reference in today's episode to kind of discuss where that trend has came about, how the trend has developed, maybe discuss some reasons and why some parents feel the need to do so, and some of the benefits, maybe some of the cons of it as well, and give people an idea as to what's going on around the rest of this nation when it comes to educating students.
Yeah, so I wanted to jump in and add some things. So first and foremost, when you're talking about homeschooling, it's not like homeschooling is some new thing, right? It's not new, it's not new age. People have been homeschooling their children for the longest, for forever, right? But with regards to the things that have been going on in our country, as Everett said, they have the rate in which children are being homeschooled has increased. So they did a study. You said it was University of Georgia, Malik? Yeah, it was University of Georgia. They did a study based on the 2020 census. And if y'all remember 2020, we were knee deep in COVID. Everybody's at home. But the what happened was, aside from the fact that a lot of parents found out their kids weren't the angels that they thought that they were, they did find out that the children weren't receiving the full education that they thought that they were getting. And with that, the rate in which parents have decided to homeschool increased from 3.3% to 16%. Now, I mean, that number may not seem big to some people but when you think about the number of quantity of people that is, it's huge. And so, there definitely are some arguments as it relates to as it relates to the pros and cons of homeschooling, right? Some would argue that homeschooling is not beneficial when it comes to the socialization of a child, right? Because think about it. A lot of us, most of us went to public school, right? Private school, you still have socialization too, because there's far more interaction with other children, the same age, the age groups of your children. And they tend to grow, learn how to interact with people better. They learn how to be more social. And it's not just telephone face, always just want to be, that happens anyway, right? But there's still a level of socialization where it's not all your interaction with other people is through a screen, right? It's not something where you're always on some sort of social media platform, or it's only on Zoom or things like that. You get to socialize with other children. But there are programs, homeschooling programs, where, like, let's say the child stays home, they do their schoolwork, but then they interact with other children. They'll have field trips. They'll have other activities where they get to spend time with other kids, so that they do, that they are appropriately socialized. The issue is during COVID, that was definitely mitigated, minimized, or didn't happen as frequently because of fears of, the spread of COVID. So I think that it's important to recognize that there are absolutely, different reasons why these things took place. But the pandemic was likely the biggest reason for the start of it, and what ignited, initiated parents to start homeschooling, because they started recognizing the deficiencies in the curriculum.
Yeah, so another reason that I kind of want to highlight, I guess it kind of goes into one another. I'm not sure if you dive deep into the critical race theory aspect, Sam, or not. When I was listening to you talk, okay. So that's another worry, according to this article by CNN that we're referencing a bit. That is one of the many articles that house the data from the United States Census. So basically what they were saying is that a lot of Black people that they've interviewed and pulled and surveyed, they were worried about one of the things is the critical race theory, which is basically, scholars acknowledging that racism is systematic and institutional throughout the American curriculums. And, and obviously, that's a big concern for Black families due to the history of this country. And, once you see how Black people are treated, a la George Floyd situation, right? As an example, right? That was a national thing. There was protests in every single state in the country. There was protests in Africa. I think Nigeria was protesting. It was protests pretty much a lot of countries worldwide, and definitely every state in the U.S. That was like the first recorded in history, I believe. So it was a monumental type of thing that shifted the focus to where that statistics jump, where Black children were homeschooled at of 3.3%, right? And it jumped all the way to 16 point something percent, I think 16.9% or 16.8, somewhere like that, somewhere around there. So basically almost 17%, it jumped. So that's like an increase almost 5 times. It's a lot of increase right there. So that's a big worry for people, because we already know there's racism that permeates throughout the area activity of American society. And that's concerning for for parents, right? And for guardians of children, because you want to pour in the right things, a good environment for your children, a nurturing, loving, caring environment for these children. And when they're in a bad environment already, it's going to increase the likelihood that it's going to have an adverse effect on the children. That's why it's so important to have a good environment. Like when other students are having a good environment where they're dealing with teachers that look like them, teaching about people that look like them and their success and wins, instead of seeing like success and wins of other people. And then you see, when you see people that look like you, there's always some bad negative stereotypes or tropes or bad things. And that doesn't represent the whole group. So that can have a damaging effect on the children. And I think that's one of the things that really scared Black families into enrolling their children into homeschooling at high rates, the highest of any country, and the highest group of anybody in the country. So another thing. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I also wanted to add on to something that you just said. Like you made a good point in referencing how, this thing could, and how homeschooling can help build confidence. And I think that's one of the major things that, we kind of see sometimes in kind of collaborating on both of the things that you guys talked about, helping building confidence in the individual, and then also socialization. How when you have a good level of confidence, it makes it a lot easier for you to socialize with others because you know who you are. And then the next thing is too, like to the point that you made, in addition to going into the field trip, sometimes, those group assignments that you have, that also shows you a way to socialize, whether it's within getting help with assistance with homework and things of that nature, or if it also could be with the ability of you being able to learn how to work in a group setting in order to achieve a goal. Some of those things can be done in activities as far as sports and things of that nature. So, certain times that could be an opportunity for students who may be homeschooled to get that opportunity, as if they're able to participate in, extracurricular activities. But I also think that the thing that we have to look for and the unbalancing of this thing, when you talk about homeschooling jumping, like you said, almost to a 5x time frame, is we have to remember, and we talked about this in the past, that schools receive funding based off of course, the number of students that they have and then that property value. And so when you have students leaving, the public school district, that's an expense, or that's a cost of tens of thousands of dollars per student, that may be leaving that school district. And I think that could be something that may hopefully make some schools look to see, well, what are some of the reasons why these students are leaving? Is it because, to the point that you made as well with the critical race theory, well, we don't want certain students to feel some type of way. But what about the students who have been feeling some type of way for decades, and they've had to go to school, and like you said, had to only hear about trauma and some of the horrific things that their families or their ancestors had to go through in order for this country to be the great country that it is today, as opposed to now when they're asking for us to kind of let that slide because some people may feel a little more guilty about the things that happen. What does that do for, like we said, students who can find strength in that, who can find, the fact that, they can understand that they were foundational to this country being able to be a superpower, and understanding how their role that they played was effective in making this country what it is today. So I think, there's also things that we may need to look at that can come about this shift. And in particular, like we know, when the money goes is where you likely see a lot of things happen. And when we see, tens of thousands of dollars leaving certain schools, I'm quite sure that we will find a way to see that these schools are going to look to make either some changes or make some things come about where they are going to try to retain some of those students, if not gain them back, So that was something I also wanted to show, what that statistic and how that statistic can, in particular, affect those school districts in general, because it cuts into their bottom line.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, E. But also, too, like, just to kind of go back a little bit with the critical race theory, first and foremost, to all our viewers, we have done a whole entire podcast on the critical race theory. So y'all make sure y'all go back and watch that, because we give a lot more in-depth information with regards to that than we'll really get into today. But what I will say is, as it relates to the critical race theory and the in schools, particularly in the state of Florida, taking the teachings of Black history essentially out of the curriculum, it does all students a disservice. I don't care if the kids are Black, white, purple, green, yellow, or orange, right? The reason why is because these things actually happened. They are a part of history, not just American history, but also world history. And to take it out just because you're embarrassed by the behavior and acts of your forefathers is not doing anybody any beneficial service. Just understand that this is what happened. You don't like it. We don't like it, but it happened though, right? And because you can never avoid things from happening again or history repeating itself if you don't know what that history is. And so I think that it's important to really understand that during the pandemic, when all of the protests and stuff were going on around the country with regards to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others, right? A lot of Black families chose to homeschool because at that point, it was, like you guys said, it was safer for them. They felt not only were their children in a more safe environment, because there were definitely Black children that were going to predominantly white schools that were getting bullied by children for being Black, whether it be because their parents were racist and the children don't know. Racism is a learned behavior, right? So in some instances, children were being bullied for being Black. They were making really negative comments and statements about Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and countless others that keep getting continuously getting murdered by the police, about police, about protests, about all of it, right? When in actuality, it's like it's coming from a place of ignorance. And so then these parents were having to unlearn their children from the things that they just learned at school, from the ignorance of maybe another student, and even some teachers. And so, as a result, a lot of parents chose, look, we're not doing this no more, right? I want my child to be safe in their education. I want them to make learning fun, right? Because it's not fun if, you're being bullied. Like, I don't ever recall, and I don't know if you guys have ever had an experience or know of anybody that's had an experience where you see Black people, Black students bullying white students because of the things that their ancestors did to their ancestors, right? Like, you don't hear about Black students, calling white students names and treating them poorly and all that because their ancestors enslaved Black people, kidnapped and enslaved Black people. You don't hear about that because I don't think it happens, right? Because I think Black students are too busy trying to digest what happened to their forefathers. You see what I'm saying? And that guilt, that's not nobody's problem, right? Like, you feel guilty for something that somebody else did. There's no need for you to feel guilty for something that your forefathers did. As long as you are not engaged in that behavior, you know that it happened. You know how to do better, because when you know better, you do better, right? And so with that being said, like, of course, parents absolutely say, you know what? With this critical race theory, they're trying to educate. They don't want my child to know about who they are, right? And that's a problem. That's a problem because, you don't fully understand the depths of who you are when historically you have been robbed of learning about who you are. When Africans were brought to this country, weren't allowed to read, write. They were stripped of their religion and language and dignity. You know what I'm saying? And so many other things. And identity. And so here it is, Black folks are trying to regain that understanding from a different place, right? Because no longer are we Africans. We are descendants of Africans, but now we're Americans. And I'm just speaking specifically to the descendants of slaves, right? And so with that being said, it's like we're trying to repair damage done to Black people historically from the stripping of who they are, from the stripping of the culture. Black people have had to Black people in America, let me just be clear. Black people in America have had to create their own culture because the culture that we had being from Africa was taken from us, and we didn't have a full understanding of what that was. And based on the things that we've been through in this country over the past 400 to 500 years, we've had to learn and figure it out, right? And find our own space, despite the fact we still sit at the bottom of the totem pole in so many other areas. within this nation. But yet this country was built on the backs of Black people and our descendants and continues to flourish and thrive off the backs of Black people today. And so children need to be able to understand that. They need to be able to understand that so that they can grow. They have to be able to know that so they can grow, build a stronger foundation so that we have a community, right? Because we often have just, we're a diaspora. We have an understanding, but when you go into, we did another podcast about that too. You go into communities where there's a predominantly Black, but you go into the store and there's no Black owned stores, right? In that neighborhood, or like you have all of these different things happening where Black folks are not really holding it down in their own community. Because why? Every time they start to, things happen. Just like what happened in Tulsa, right? Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Like you said, with the Tulsa situation, I just wanted to kind of bring it back into with the whole homeschooling thing and how I think, one of the more importance of being able to have, and particularly for Black people to be able to have the ability to teach, is that, again, one of the things we've always taught is, like I was always taught, was you're going to learn some of the most important lessons from in home. And I think a lot of times, in order for you to understand some of the strength of your culture, unfortunately, those are things that we were taught, or at least I was taught coming up, that those are the lessons that you will have to learn at home, because they're not going to teach you about your greatness. They're not going to teach you about your history. They're not going to teach you about the kings and queens that may have came from Africa and the legacies that were coming from, a la Haley Caesar or not Gandhi, but Gaddafi and other kings who lived and ruled in Africa, and even go back to Cleopatra and other people who were
even with that though, that gets whitewashed, right? Because a lot of times, Cleopatra, people watch a Cleopatra movie, they got Elizabeth Taylor, a white woman, playing an African queen, right? A lot of times,
even you can look at the example of more recently, when Kevin Hart just recently got caught up in Egypt, and I think they pulled one of his shows because he spoke about who he felt like the original Egyptians were, meaning Black people, and it was like some Israelis or some individuals took offense to that.
Right, that's what I was going to say. Like, there are people that actually believe that Egypt is in the Middle East. Egypt is absolutely 100% connected to the continent of Africa. It is an African country, right? And so, but also too, one of the books that we suggested a while back, which was the Destruction of Black Civilization. They talk about how once Black people, my people, started to have children, they were considered white rather than Black, whereas in this country they were considered Black rather than white, and so then, bringing it back to the critical race theory, all of that stuff gets taken out, right? And it's important to know these things. It's important to know who you are, where you come from, so that you can grow. And so, like you said, homeschooling at that point is absolutely imperative. But you can teach that while your kid still goes out to school, right? But I think the reason
and that's the thing, I think that we were kind of like looking to see if that could be added into the traditional curriculums within the public schooling. Whereas where I feel like now this is where when you do homeschooling, you kind of get a little bit, kind of like for individuals who, attended undergrad and college, you have a study that you're doing for your major, and then you have electives that you have to do, right? Where you kind of can select things that's not necessarily within your major, but they can help either add to the enrichment of the collegiate experience. So, it might not be something that's required for you to receive the degree that you want, but it's something that they feel like you need in order to get enough credits to pass. And I feel like when we talk about homeschool,
but that depends on the type of school too, right? Because if you're at a PWI, it's an elective. At an HBCU, it is a required core class to learn about.
I'm not. Can I add in something, guys, real quick? on what
Sure,
y'all
but just let me get this last little statement off.
about.
I'm not talking about just the curriculum of learning about Black history. I mean, so like more so like when you're doing homeschooling, you can add these lessons in, and you can tailor the way you teach some parts of history as well to add in certain lessons and add in certain individuals within that time frame and some of the things that they did. Whereas if you're doing it in a more traditional route, they may not have the time to add those things in because they're just trying to do what they're doing, teaching maybe for the test, teaching for other things that they have to do in order to make sure that they are meeting the guidelines that are set by the school district. Whereas as a homeschool teacher, you can take the time to teach them other things that can enrich not only just their understanding of history, but also, again, helping with that self-confidence, helping with them to know their past. I'm sorry, Willie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what y'all saying. That's an argument for the homeschooling movement because you can tailor custom made the curriculum to your child's needs, or if if your child's interested in astronomy, you can teach them about from a Black perspective, right? Like astronomers, Black scientists, stuff like that. As far in addition to the history, some of the core subjects, math, history, English, the reading, the writing, all the core fundamentals you have to learn through your education. Even in public school, you have to learn some of these core fundamental classes. But for example, in the article that we're referencing here, one family decided, oh, we're going to have our child participate in a Black comic type of class, just to because their child might be into comics or superheroes and stuff like that. So you can take a class on that. So you can kind of tailor made for that, as opposed to if you're in a public school system, you're restricted within the confined environment of their curriculum. So that's one argument. And Sam had brought up safety. That's another argument for homeschooling. Like you don't have to worry about the racism, in your front, or less chance of racism. You never know if there's a tutor coming to the house could be a little racist. But as far as the chance of it, it's severely reduced. And safety, worrying about a school shooter, that's severely reduced. Worrying about a shooting or any harm to your child, so that risk is lowered. So I know that's a concern with all these mass shootings. I know that's not really the racist aspect that we've been talking about and the systemic racism, but it's still part of it. It can be racist too, because we've seen Dylan Roof situation and others. They were racially motivated attacks. So, and we've seen stuff happen at different all levels of education, as far as the schools go, colleges, universities, elementary, and all that stuff. So, safety is a big issue for parents. So I think that's one of the that's another shift. They just saw that George Floyd incident, and it's like enough is enough. Like we're not going to subject our children to this treatment.
Right. And then the other argument that I made earlier with regards to, which is a counter argument to that, is socialization, right? I mean, yeah, they have field trips, they have all of that, but the extracurricular activities, right? What about the kids that want to learn how to play instruments or, sports? If you grow up in a household where your parents aren't into sports and you are, how are you going to really learn? How are you going to gain that camaraderie if that's not available to you anymore, right? Or same thing with music and things like that. So there's lots of different avenues and aspects where children gain growth through, extracurricular activities, other social activities. You get some of the best friends that you've ever had in your life while you're in school. And if you are just doing it through a computer, when are you really having the time? Unless a parent, has students come over. But then at that point, it's almost like your parents are picking and choosing your friends, as opposed to you going out there to recess, playing, running around, doing the things that you do as a kid, to get that same type of experience, even in college, right? Like during the pandemic, when schools were like closed, it's like you had kids going to live on campus, but like we're still doing Zoom school, which was crazy because it's like you're not getting that same experience. College is not just about learning, and it's just not just about partying either. Definitely about meeting people, networking, learning who you are. And you can do those things, but when you are, in that type of environment physically, there's a value to it that's really kind of inexplainable. And I think that it's important to recognize that right there can be lacking when you're just doing homeschooling, right? Depending on how that parent chooses to homeschool, depending on the type of curriculum that parent chooses to go into as it relates to how they want to teach their children, things like that. So I do think that it's incredibly important to recognize that the socialization of children is also something that that should always be considered when schooling, regardless if you choose to homeschool or send that child to a facility to be educated.
I think also another con that could be viewed in regards to, students being homeschooled in Black homes is, and this is, I'm labeling that as a con, but I don't necessarily believe per se that it's a bad thing. Is because of how society is I don't think you'll have a strong concept on what life is like in reality, right? And what I mean by that is we know from looking at the statistics, when you're Black and you're in school, and just like in society, you're likely to get in trouble a lot more because teachers may not necessarily understand how, the young man might be a little more active or things of that nature, which not to say that a Black young boy is going to be more active than a white young boy. But again, they may view the things that the other a young man that may look like them was used to doing. They may view them one way, and then they'll view the way that a Black young man is doing something in his behaviors in a totally different fashion. So that's one of the first times when we will see as a kid that you do what Timmy just did. Timmy gets a talking to maybe, and that's it. You do it, you're dealing with detention. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, that's a life lesson. Like we all want to make it seem like, oh, we don't want that to be the case, and we don't want to believe that things are different. But here we are. Like, we talked about this the other day on our What's Up Wednesday. But look at Chris Brown. He's like, look at how Charlie Sheen did this. Look at how such and such did this. They got treated this way. Why am I getting treated differently? And I think if you're in homeschool, you won't have that lesson to understand that everything isn't fair. Because when you're dealing with your household, your family likely is going to treat you fairly, ideally. They're likely going to treat you fairly. There's going to be rules across the board. You'll fool around and get into society and think that that's how the world's supposed to work, and realize a real quick awakening that no, everything isn't equal for you on this playing field. So I think that's something that could be a somewhat of a con. Even though I don't necessarily think that it would be a con in life, if you guys understand what I'm saying with that, because of the fact that, again, when you're dealing with society, you have to understand how society is going to view you, not necessarily what you feel like is the right thing,
Yeah.
And to double down on that as well is I think that that also plays a role with learning how to interact with others in society, right? Right, with other races in society, because you may be used to, using your vernacular and AED, when you're talking to your friends, your cousins, your peers, and then you have to get into, excuse me, maybe a different environment and something that you may have been comfortable doing and comfortable speaking in, that will be adverse to the way that you're going to be treated if you use those type of diction in that type of environment. So you have to learn. Sometimes people will say, how to code switch, if you will, when you're dealing with certain things, or how to conduct yourself in a business manner, as people will say, business like manner, when you're dealing with certain individuals. And that's very much real. And that's something that happens with a lot of people in order for them to move forward in society. So in conclusion, those are some of the things. I do think that ultimately, though, if a family has the ability to do it and they have the means to be able to provide their student with that type of lifestyle, to be able to educate them, to be able to add, some enrichment as well for them, then I do think that it could be a wonderful experience and a great thing. I'm definitely for advocating for homeschooling. especially if you have a parent who has the ability, who's knowledgeable, who's going to take the time to do everything that they need to do. I don't know. So I'm all for it, and I just wanted to put that down as some of my final thoughts before you guys do yours, and I'll come back around with some of our Black business and things. Yeah.
Sure. Just real quick, I'll be brief. I agree with homeschooling for the most part. I guess my only exception is this whole social aspect. I think maybe you can kind of, once your child gets a certain age, they can get into some sort of smaller learning environment. It doesn't have to be too big, or maybe some sort of group homeschooling or something like that, so they can have some social interaction with other kids, because I think that is important, because they do lose some of the networking aspects. But I mean, I think it would only be beneficial if you're going to one of those prestigious private schools, because I mean, networking usually comes throughout work and events and maybe college and universities anyway. So I don't think, K through 12, they're losing too much as far as networking goes. So that's some of my thoughts about it, my final thoughts.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the parent. I think it depends on the area that they live in, and what that curriculum looks like in that school. I know for me, when I was in school, I got a really good education. I was in one of the top public schools in the country when I was in grade school, but everybody didn't have that experience, right? And so where I may have learned certain things, other people did not. And so I think that it's incredibly important, because if I compare my education in grade school to the education that a child is getting in Florida right now, they are vastly different, especially too because of because critical race theory has been taken out of schools there. And so I think that parents definitely should weigh that against also to the social aspects, and also to determine whether or not they are in the position to be able to homeschool their children, because some parents are not. And so they also need to consider, what they want to do that's extra for their babies. So my final thoughts is, I think that parents need to really take a step back and really balance out and weigh out all of the pros and cons as it relates to their child, their circumstance, and the area in which they live. He's gonna come right around once he.
Yeah. So thank you, guys. Sorry about that. So one of the things that I wanted to add next was our quote of the week, and this one is from Aldous Huxley, and it says, "There is only one corner of the universe that you can be certain of improving, and that's your own self." And I think one of the reasons why I thought that this quote was fitting for this week's topic is because it allows for us to deal with one of the things that we're talking about. There's a lot of times when people talk about there's issues within the schools, within how, like you said earlier, how our students are being handled on the disciplinary stages, how our students are, how some of the curriculum that's taught to the students may not necessarily be enriching for their soul and their spirits, things of those natures. And one of the best ways for people to be able to take accountability for some of those things and atone for those difficulties or those things that may be lacking would be for them to take it into their own perspectives and do the teaching at home. So I definitely wanted to use that quote. For our book of the month this month, it is by Curtis 50 Cent Jackson, and the book is called Hustle Harder, Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter. Great book with tons of gems in regards to networking, in regards to the type of attitude you need to have to become successful in this world and business, in regards to just deciphering people and who to have around you, what to do, how to be around you, how to build up confidence, commitment. There's just a lot of things that he talked about in that book that kind of dealt with his approach to things and his willingness to kind of share his success. And I think that's something that we can really appreciate, because this is an individual who has been successful in multiple areas of the entertainment world and he talks about some of the things that he's drawn from, you know, his experiences within, you know, the rap, and before it went from, you know, again, the CD sales era to now the streaming era, and then also his success in into switching over into doing producing for, you know, TV shows and even a few movies and things. So 50 Cent, Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter, excellent book. You guys check that out. And last but not least is our Black Business of the Month. And this business is called Active Faith Sports. It is a Black-owned business, but it's one that is Christian-based. It is a active wear, sportswear clothing line, which provides, you know, clothing, but with faith-based and inspirational type quotes and things on its shirts or materials. So you guys can check that business out as well. It was formed from a former NFL athlete who then started this company. So that's our business of the month. I want to leave you guys with, we will have our episodes posted here, our new podcast episodes posted on our YouTube page every Saturday around 1:30 p.m. You also can check us live on our Instagram on Wednesdays at around 8:30. We go live with our What's Up Wednesdays. You can catch us at Counterpoise Podcast. Again, our social medias will be posted up on after this here shortly. And then also just want to tell you guys we appreciate it. You know, of course, reach out to us anytime, leave comments with anything that you would like us to discuss and things that you would like us to go over. But with that, that's all I have to say. I don't know if anybody else has any last little things that they want to add.
Yeah, there's just two things I want to add. If you guys ever want to be on the show, please also feel free to reach out to us. We would love that. We'd like to have company. And then the other thing is also, which is probably not going to be at the end, but I need to make sure we get it added, is that if you, I'm also on the Tagged app. So if ever you want to come follow me on the Tagged app, please feel free to come do so. My name there is Sam, that's SAMM. I Yam YAMM. So it's SAMM IYAMM. So y'all come check me out. I didn't have anything else. Other than that, did you, Malik? You're muted.
No, I don't have anything else. Just, you know, for those who listen to us, you know, 70% of our listeners, make sure you subscribe. We know you listen. Just subscribe.
Yeah, like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, all that good stuff.
So that's it. Thank you guys for listening.
We'll see y'all.
And pull up on me. Pull up on me. See y'all.